Hello and welcome to Conversations with Benjamin Boyce. Today's conversant is Jessie Mannisto, who is the head lead editor of Third Factor magazine, tackling issues that have been known throughout many a year to be important for all of us. Jessie Mannisto.
Hello, Benjamin.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. Are you on a Lapa Tapa?
I am. Is that okay?
I like the shot, but I want it a little higher. Can you toss a book underneath it?
I have a standing desk. Is that better?
Oh, dude. Okay, and then just angle it a little bit.
Yeah. Is that good?
Okay. There we go.
All right. I love my standing desk. It's amazing.
Looking up to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Do you have a bouncy ball underneath your butt?
No, I don't. I have a chair.
Okay.
Should I raise the chair?
No, that's fine.
I can still bounce if you want me to bounce, but.
Do you have some spring?
Yeah, absolutely, I do.
Everything's off. Third Factor. Sasha Ayad. Gender.
Oh, yeah. Those are all things I am familiar with.
Yeah?
Yeah. We can talk about any of those things.
Okay. What should we talk about before we start talking about those things?
Well, I guess, if you want me to just jump into it's a long journey, and I think starting from the beginning is boring.
Okay,
but just jumping into the thick of it is kind of like...
In media res.
That's in media res. I wrote that in my notes, start in medias res. I'm happy you came up with that too. You're a lit guy, aren't you?
Yeah, to my detriment, or maybe benefit.
Yes, also to mine, that I also am one. But yes, in medias res. Let's do it that way.
Okay.
All right.
Do you want to do by date or theme? Is there a historical event? Like Trump coming down a staircase? Is that where we want to begin? Because a lot of people in media res begin right there,
Oh, yeah. No, I have that in my story. But let me start now, where we are today.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Third Factor magazine right now is in medias res. It's a magazine that I'm working on. I founded it in 2008, so a couple years post-Trump, not really related to Trump.
2008 or 18?
I'm sorry. 2018 post-Trump. Okay. I mean, it's a couple years post-Trump. And yeah, I started it. Because can I?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. All right. So jumping in where we are right now, Third Factor is a magazine that I founded back in 2018, and I'm going to call it a place for weird people on the internet. Uncommon people on uncommon paths is the way I'm marketing it right now.
All right, cool.
And I would say especially unhappy people on the internet, which is really what a lot of people are, unfortunately. But the sort of people who go to spend a lot of time creating things, maybe they're angry about something, maybe they're dissatisfied with their lives, they just feel lonely. The Third Factor crowd, right? There's a lot of unhappy people. So let me zoom in a little more. The Third Factor crowd, we tend to be incorrigible questioners. We are creative, which comes with that sort of, drive to produce something that the world may utterly reject, and finding ways to build with other people. This is our crowd. The intellectual, creative, imaginative, and usually big feeling sort of people.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they have to be angry too. Or upset, you said?
No. They tend to be upset. They absolutely do not have to be. Why are we
so touchy? Upset. Why do you think it is we're so irritable right now?
Yeah, because, I don't know. Look at the world. the usual reasons that you have covered plenty on your show. People are getting more and more unhappy. But they've been unhappy on the internet for a long time, right? This is kind of why I said, okay, I'm starting in the middle of things. Where should I start for this story? I'm a sort of older millennial. I graduated high school in 2000. and that kind of matters, pegging exactly where I came into this. But I've had a website since 1996 when I was, just before I started high school. And always the sort of like quirky, creative kids who had access to the internet. We went on it real quick and discovered this is amazing. I can create my own world. I can put my imaginative content out there. I can meet other people who are a little bit like me. It's been great. But growing up that way, I, being now in my late 30s, I'm able to see, oh, wow, I developed these certain skills and things that got praised a lot at the detriment of other things. And now I spend too much time in my head, and I have developed these skills, but I see how it took me a long time to get there. Okay. And that is how, I like your quizzical look. Let's unpack that a little bit. Yeah, no, this is why I'm like, I got to get this message out there, because people don't necessarily follow this path. But, okay, you go online because the world offline is not meeting all of your needs. If you had people to talk to, if you had people to engage intellectually, to people who would mirror your emotions, that's really important. Like, I'm not really getting, I feel weird. Why am I reacting negatively to this other thing that everybody likes? Like, maybe they're all like sports fans and I'm like, sports are stupid. I actually like sports. I'm a big hockey fan. But
I can see that. Yeah. You
can see that back there. Yeah. So I love that. I can tell you about how that's sort of a symbol to me, but we'll come back to that. At a time, I didn't like that. I just wanted to engage in these things that other people thought were boring and not important, intellectual questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
not like quantum physics, but like postmodern deconstruction of like Plato's Republic kind of thing.
Absolutely. When I was a kid, or a high school, college student, I really wanted to get into these big ideas because, that's. I wish I'd had more chance to do that in college, because it just seemed like, oh, this is our civilization. This is interesting. This is how to build a good life, understanding society. I mean, basically, I was a nerd. I'm talking about nerds.
Okay, I think
nerds,
I don't think it's difficult to see that.
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, absolutely. Well, and Third Factor is a magazine for these sort of people who come from this nerdy background, but don't necessarily want to stay there. Like I originally started targeting gifted alumni of gifted programs who kind of didn't really find a fit. There's a long history of that. The illustrious Mensa International. And you know how Mensa's perceived. People, oh, no, you don't know how Mensa's perceived? Okay.
No, every acronym, it takes me like 5 or 6 years of hearing it repeatedly before it sinks in. And Mensa I have not been exposed to enough. But I suppose it's an elite institution that I should be ashamed for not knowing.
No. It's okay that you don't know Mensa. Mensa is a high IQ foundation.
Okay, yeah. It's the one where you get like some sort of point, and then they appoint you as a pointed person.
Yeah,
like IQ.
Yeah. You get in based on your IQ score.
Okay.
And sometimes I get people who go there thinking like, oh, maybe I'll find the people like me, the questioners, the people who want to dig into this intellectual stuff. And they go there, and like I've heard from people who have been there and come my way, all they wanted to do was sit around like playing puzzles and beating each other, because all they've got is, oh, I've got a high IQ. And people are really insecure when they haven't had this, they haven't found a way to channel this and haven't found this questioning welcomed and put to good use.
Okay. They
become contrarians. I use the term contrarian, like I consider myself, I think contrarian applies to me, but there's ways to do it in a healthy way, and there's ways where it just becomes a knee-jerk sort of, I'm just going to question what everyone says because no one ever listens to me and I'm usually right. And so you don't develop that questioning ability.
Okay, so questioning is different than being contrarian or being subversive if you're like an artist. Questioning is some other modality of engagement with a field of discourse.
Okay, no, that's a fair distinction. So let me say that, I would say that someone who is questioning in the way that you described is doing something healthy, But if they have that innate impulse to do it and they've never had anyone to practice with, right?
Okay.
They've never had a sparring partner, someone who doesn't think they're just annoying, then they might become the sort of, knee-jerk contrarian who's just mad at everybody.
Okay.
And they go join Mensa and they look for people to talk to develop this unusual talent or unusual trait.
Okay.
And they get lonely and upset.
Because the way that people who gravitate towards Mensa are engaging with a field of discourse is basically through a very abstract puzzle assemblance and deconstruction, kind of figuring things out, but in a very more or less technical way rather than figuring things out in a humanist way. Like, what's the difference? What's the depth that's being lost?
I threw Mensa out there. I've not even been to a Mensa meeting myself. Okay. I just hear things hearsay. It's just people who felt weird because they were nerds. They were bright nerds. They knew they were gifted, high IQ, and so they're looking for their tribe. That's the key. They're looking for their tribe. And they get in there, and from what I'm told, again, secondhand, people are just, they want to play puzzle games. They don't want to engage always in these big questions. So they come my way. They come to Third Factor, or sometimes they come to Third Factor. They go online. They look for other places to find this, to get this need met.
What
they
is
feel
this
weird.
need? Yeah, but what is this need? Like, what is the quality of these questions, these big questions? Like, what is it engaging with? Like, mosses or human history or what? Like, what is
it's just, it's the physiological impulse that makes you question that. The active intellect, that's what I would call it, about whatever question, right? You want to dive into science because you ask the endless why. You want to understand what's true. You don't just want to take what you're taught. You want to say, but wait, like, isn't this an exception? And but couldn't we solve this problem this way, differently? And you don't need to build a better mousetrap, maybe. People brush you off and say, like, this is fine, go away. Can't you find something else to do and stop asking all these annoying questions? Okay. So, yeah. I mean, people who get a good education don't often have... No. Let me take that back. It's not a good education, but people who have the additional guidance of people who know how to get on the right career path or how to get into... fields that are not just looking at your credentials, but you need a connection, big writing platforms, prestigious science projects. If you can find your way in, you need a little luck, you need help building those soft skills. Those people don't need a place like Third Factor or Mensa or anything like that because they're in a circle where that need, that intellect can be engaged versus being in this anti-intellectual sphere of being told that you're overthinking things, you're boring, you're a nerd, that kind of thing. This is really basic. That's what I'm getting at with that. And the imagination and the emotions, those work too. In addition to the intellect, they have a similar. But anyway, what were you going to say?
Well, it's like a liminal cafe or maybe a bed and breakfast. People can spend extended periods of time here, but it's in between one place and the other. It's not a institution. It's not guarded by the institutions, but it's not necessarily for those. Well, it's for those who are seeking a little bit more, but can't get into yet those institutions where their prowess would be rewarded with accolades and career path.
Well, yeah, you mean Third Factor or Mensa, those sort of places?
Factor, or like what we're describing this Bower, this kind of like weird shanty town of where people are mingling.
The lost nerds. Yeah. They are, they people get lost. A lot of the people who come to me are lost on a career path. They didn't quite know how to actualize their talents. They went into something that was prestigious and then hated it and felt really sad and depressed. I get a lot of those people pitching me articles.
Disaffected inquisitors.
Yeah. Disaffected inquisitors. Yes. and creative types in addition to that.
Okay.
I would say that's a big part of our audience.
Okay,
Yeah.
so creatives, there's a distinction between the questioners and the creatives, kind of like the intellectual. What's the difference in your emotive, imaginative way of thinking? If you do think that way, I'm sorry.
No, I would say that I do think that way. And the distinction is, well, there are people who engage their intense mind, their intense physiology by asking those sort of cerebral, intellectual, rational questions. And then there are people who want to do something that's a little more like, oh, I've got this realm in my head where I can see, imagine alternate futures, fantasy. Fantasy is a great way to engage that, but you don't only have to engage this ability to envision the counterfactual through fantasy.
Or through narrative.
But those are, yeah, right. You can do it in a lot of ways. Applying, again, if you get a job in the sciences, thinking of ideas that are, things that people haven't put together yet. And that's a really good, when you get into professional spaces, a really good team, you do need those just like rational, let me say, convergent and divergent thinkers.
Oh.
That's what I would describe those.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a concept I don't think I've heard before. So,
Really? Okay.
which is better?
Neither is better. You need both.
Oh, damn it. Okay. So one's not the good guy,
No, wait.
and the other one's the slovenly
No.
younger brother. Okay. So they're twins.
Let me throw you for my. Yes. Okay. They're like a brother and sister who need to work together and don't always work together well. Let me throw you for my curveball. I used to work for the CIA, which people usually want to talk about. It's not that exciting. Yeah. Okay. But they talk about this a lot there.
They're still watching you, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm sure they're watching, and probably say hello to like Russian and Chinese intelligence services.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Uh-huh. So, but
you got to use a skill set in the CIA.
I did.
And
That's
develop
right.
that. Okay.
But I was more unusual there because I tend to be higher on divergent thinking than other people are. This was really driven home to me when I was an intelligence analyst. That is the job I had. I was an analyst. And I actually took a class on using creativity. My boss is like, why don't you go and figure out this way to, because you don't think in the traditional analyst way. But I went to work with a graphic designer to represent some of my analysis. And the graphic designer was like, oh, yeah, you think really differently from the usual analysts who I usually have trouble visualizing their things. But you came in with this idea already. That's wonderful. I'll just make it for you in Photoshop or whatever they use. And that was a great success. But the class I got sent to after that fuss in the Directorate of Analysis was, my boss is like, why don't you go take this class, Creativity in Intelligence. And I write about this at Third Factor, an article called The Creative Intelligence Agency. And it was sort of my process of trying to learn how to be this sort of a more, using the imagination, because you don't think using the imagination is like kids with crayons making fun pictures and, fantasy. It's not being a CIA analyst. Should be to some extent. And so this class was designed for the more rational thinkers to learn to be more like me. So it was a really weird experience, because here I am being like, yes, I'm the example, but I'm not. I'm just unusual in that environment.
Okay.
This brings us back to convergent and divergent thinking. They talked about it in that class. They were explaining how this creativity class that I was sent to, is actually designed to help you use more divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is, I'm going to make sure, I didn't practice this before I talked to you, so this is like roughly pulling out of my mind from like a couple years ago. Okay. Convergent thinking is getting the right answer, doing a math problem and coming up with like 2 + 2 = 4, right? Versus like all the different creative ways. You're seeing some divergent thinking in that 2 + 2 = 5 discourse, but that's not maybe a misapplication of it. But that's there's a right answer. There is something that is true and you want to get to it. Divergent thinking is taking a jewel case for a CD and thinking of all the different ways you can use this case. We actually did that in the class. It's thinking outside the box, right?
Okay.
That's the not very divergent way to describe divergent thinking.
Okay. It's odd because I had those intuitively flipped. I thought like the imaginative way would be a convergent thinking of just taking different ideas and putting them together and making solutions out of things that are divergent, normally speaking, and then divergent. But that's divergent thinking. So what are you diverging from?
I mean, that's a good
like
question.
Exterior oriented, I guess not necessarily even problem solving. It's just problem actually generating and solution generating. It's more of the brainstorm type rather than the calculating.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You want to do a lot of divergent thinking first when you're solving problems, right?
Okay.
If you want to, to come up with the idea on September 1st, 2001, that terrorists would fly planes into a building, that would take imagination. That would take divergent thinking.
Yeah.
But, right? But you're exactly right. That's the brainstorming stage. Think of all the crazy things that don't seem like right answers that might make people laugh at you. I mean, that was a workshop, an exercise we did in that workshop was just say the dumbest thing you can think of. And these are all like trained professional analysts who are like, I don't want to look like a fool. And it was really hard for them. And I'm just in there like, I've got all these crazy ideas. I'm a creative writer who's put on this hat because I need a job, to be an analyst.
Mm-hmm. And you had a clean background check.
Oh, yes, I did. You have to get that job.
You know Brett Weinstein, Heather Hying, they run a podcast called Dark Horse Podcast.
Yeah,
they are kind of.
Yes, that is very much a divergent thinking sort of mindset. I really respect what they're doing. And I think that people who are more into convergent thinking, especially under a high stakes, environment, are going to not have a lot of patience for this divergent thinking. That's why the CIA has a class in it, because they are always dealing with these high stakes questions.
Lives on the line.
So, yes, exactly. But that's why I wasn't the target audience for that class. My boss didn't know that. She's just like, go try this and see if it works. But they need to understand that divergent thinking has a place. And when you ask, like, is one better than the other, even someone like me who's more inclined toward this, who has more imagination, should only be doing it like 20% of the time. Convergent thinking takes a lot of work. It's about memorizing the right answers, memorizing the facts, getting the right answer,
and the steps.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Ruling out the stuff that is garbage. It was okay to brainstorm it, but some of that stuff is going to be bad. And the ineffectual divergent thinking is the person who is, again, that contrarian. That person's just like, I had all these ideas and I've just decided they're probably correct because nobody likes me in my divergent thinking.
Oh, okay.
So I'm bitter and I'm just going to hate everybody and think I'm right all the time. I think a lot of those, the ineffectual contrarian is a spurned divergent thinker.
Okay. If they weren't loved at the right time in life.
Exactly.
I brought up Brett and Heather because before they got really big, I mean, on the cusp of, on one stage of their journey to infamy or famey.
Yes.
I worked with them very closely, just coming out of the Evergreen State College situation, and I did a lot of videos with them about these evolutionary topics, and they would pick a topic, and then Brett would riff on it, about how, when you hit your elbow, it hurts a lot more than it should, and why would that be? Why would the body develop that way? A wit, all these different things. But one thing we spoke about was within the classroom, within the scientifically oriented classroom, there was a stage of coming up with a hypothesis, and it's kind of shadows that question within the humanities of what makes somebody talented. Generating a hypothesis, they found it was very difficult to teach people that skill. You either kind of have it or you don't, or you really have to work on it. So what I hear you saying is that this hypothesis generating principle, some people have that talent for it, but if you can't then follow it through by, rigorous, testing the robustness of these ideas in a reality situation, then it's just a kind of like some sort of hoarder that kind of generates plastic toys out of their brain and then is just kind of drowning in them kind of thing.
That's precisely it. Yes. Yeah. So are you getting where like these people are not on an easy track in life? The intellectual nerds and the generators of divergent thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think that I'm one of them, and there's different coping mechanisms, such as wit. I think wit is one way, and kind of playing status games on a social level. But if you're both kind of not very socially adept or have some sort of difficulty reading reading the room, so to speak,
yes.
and you're a divergent thinker, I could see how you'd be very just distanced more and more and more from people.
Yeah, exactly. I want to throw out another thing that I talk about a lot at Third Factor, our type of people. Have you ever heard of this metaphor of the orchid and the dandelion?
Ooh. Is this kind of like a fancy version of the scorpion and the frog?
Well, I don't know that
like
metaphor.
More
so
hippie version? Okay, let's go. Orchid and the dandelion.
Let me tell you what it is.
All right.
The guy who came up with it, I don't know, maybe he's your cousin. His name is Boyce as well. Dr.
Cool.
W. Thomas Boyce, MD. He wrote a book. I mean, there's a book called The Orchid and the Dandelion, and I would say that our Third Factor is for orchids. Well, what are orchids? All right, so Dr. Boyce came
Orchid,
up
not
with,
orca. Okay.
Right. That flower, not the Free Willy. So yeah, these people who are orchids are more sensitive to stimuli. Responsive to stressors. This he did research over the course. He's like a professor emeritus now, but over the whole course of his career, he's been studying these children and their responses to tough situations in the classroom. And then he'd measure their cortisol in their saliva and do other. That's one example. He probably did plenty of other types of experiments. But what he found was that there's 15 to 20% of the population that is just more stimulable to stressors. And that's like the highly sensitive person, right? People have heard of that. That's not groundbreaking. But what he then found, his research demonstrated, was that these more sensitive ones were both more susceptible to illness, respiratory illness, and less susceptible. Whereas the people in the middle, the dandelions, or the people less susceptible to stress, which is the whole lower part of that bell curve, got sick like an average amount of time. But the more sensitive ones got sick a lot more or a lot less. And the thing that made the difference was the environment. If they were in a environment conducive to their health, then they were super healthy, more healthy than average, go on to do amazing creative works or become CEOs or just like the people we really look up to. But if they were in more pathological environments, or even, let me just say, like...
Are you speaking developmentally?
Yeah, exactly.
Like within their developmental phase. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
So they also, if they didn't get their needs met, were more likely to be hurt by that environment. Yeah. And hence the metaphor, right? The people who are the less susceptible ones who just, weren't as affected by the environment are the dandelions, because they can grow out of a crack in the cement and be their perfect, platonic ideal of a dandelion.
Oh, okay.
But the orchids, if you plant them in the right place, then they become these beautiful, complicated flowers. Yeah. But if you plant them in a pot in an office building in Alaska, then they drop all their petals and they become the people with severe mental illness.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So highly stimulable, highly sensitive to stress.
Yeah.
How does that translate into a particular intellectual proclivity?
It doesn't necessarily, but you do see like the intellect just being more sensitive. It's the whole body is more sensitive to stimuli, right? Yeah. This also gets into the work that is the foundation of Third Factor magazine and where the name even comes from. The theory of positive disintegration, which is by this Polish-Canadian psychiatrist. He died in 1980, so his stuff is old, but he touched on it in a really interesting way for these orchids, right? I think he describes the life path of these orchids better than anybody. through this thing called the theory of positive disintegration. And he talks about people being super stimulable or overexcitable. And that the reason I was saying intellect, imagination, emotion, those are all things that get stimulated by the nervous system. And if you have a high enough, G factor, IQ, whatever, if you have that gift, then that also gets activated by your body's stimulation, and you can harness it for good, or you can ruminate and overthink yourself into, catastrophe. But these are the domains that the theory of positive disintegration says are important for exercising that stress: the intellect, the imagination, and the emotions.
Okay. What does overexcitability mean in this context?
Yeah. That's the same thing, that super stimulability. You are just more easily excited. You have that lower threshold to reacting to a stimulus, or you react more intensely to it. So it's those orchids, right? It's those same kids that your cousin was studying.
Okay.
So,
so if I am an orchid, that would explain my always feeling about to be in trouble, or really, if I get a mean look, I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble. I'm overexcited in certain vectors of excitement.
I would think so. Yes.
And arousal.
Yeah. That's our audience. Those
So
are the people who. The people who we're talking to.
Okay. And so exercising these different faculties of imagination and thought and emotion, what is positive? I remember you spoke with Sasha Ayad about positive disintegration. It was a fascinating conversation. I don't know if it's public or not, but I did help her with that episode. It's on her channel, I believe. Yeah.
I think it's on her before she went into doing her podcast. If you go to her old YouTube channel, I think you can still find it there.
Yeah.
Well, we come back now. The reason I'm talking about gender, this will circle back to that.
Okay.
Yes, that's why I talked to Sasha Ayad.
Is this where we're going to get positively disintegrating our genders and turn it into a gender fluid?
That's not where I go with this. Sorry to disappoint.
Okay, whatever. It sounds alchemical. That's what I'm saying.
It does, yes. Okay. So the theory of positive disintegration is basically, it describes the life path of these orchids, and not the ones who are super lucky to be getting all the right orchid food and be fed the proper, the ice cube that melts the right amount of times, not them so much as the ones who are kind of on the border of, maybe I can bloom, but I'm not quite getting what I need. Hence, they try to go to Mensa, or they come on the internet looking for other people like them. And the idea of this theory was that instead of just brushing off these super stimulable, overexcitable people as being beyond help, because they often end up with mental distress, panic, anxiety, existential depression, the idea was that you could see this super stimulability as fuel for growth and development. Again, in line with the work that Thomas Boyce would do later, I think. That's my making that connection. I don't know if anyone else has made that connection. But so the positive disintegration, the theory, it explains what usually happens to people who go through that process. And it has a lot of academic-y, jargony sort of terms, which make it a little bit impenetrable. But for the nerds, it's fine. Nerds kind of love it. They get mad at me sometimes for dumbing it down on third factor. And then other people tell me no, this is still too academic. So that's what it is. Well, but there are some pretty cool concepts in the theory that I think, if you unpack them, explain all the craziness we're seeing on the internet and in society. I mean, I think that social media is making all of us even more stimulable. Even the dandelions are getting a little more overstimulated these days.
Yeah, we want them chill. We don't want the dandelion uprising. That's when things are really, that's the last.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So, well, okay. Shall I keep rambling about?
Well, I just wanted to interject that you remember Christianity? It's been out of fashion for a bit, but
I do remember
vestiges. Okay, it's this it's this religion, and there's different levels to it. Like when you walk into the church, well, let's say the Catholic Church, you smell, you hear, you get a story and a moral. It's very simple. Very regulated, but if you get deeper and deeper into it, there's more and more layers of complexity. So there can be a very complex theory that can be translated for different levels of sense making with it. You can just take it, make it a fairy tale. You can take it, you can make an anecdote out of it, or you can use an anecdote, use a fairy tale to kind of make it like a metaphor to get understanding. And then you can go into the dicey thing. So like should be, any good theory should be able to be translated for a variety of modalities of sense making. So I think it's totally fine.
I completely agree with you.
People complain. They don't understand that not everybody has to think the same way.
I completely agree with what you're saying. So it's just that if you go looking for positive disintegration materials, you won't find a lot that has been, simplified. I'm trying to fill that gap. I think that is a thing that there are people who disagree with me is all.
Okay. Right. That's fine.
It's a little bit gate kept, you might even say.
Well, they're contrarians by nature. You're trying to get them to be a little bit more nice. So it's part of your project, right?
That's true. Yes, it is. I think that these ideas, which again, I only can explain them in this jargony way. I'm working on breaking them down because I want to have more conversations. I think they explain a lot. So here, like some of these ideas that this guy who died in 1980, and it hasn't been researched since then. Dabrowski was friends with Maslow. It's not like he was some crank.
Hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And Maslow thought this was good stuff, but politics of the academe got in the way. You're familiar with how that can happen, of course. So
yeah,
even them,
even the academics aren't perfect.
Yeah. So or the zeitgeist or whatever. I don't know. I wasn't alive then, so I wasn't paying attention. So basically, some of the concepts that come out of this are overexcitability. That's Dabrowski's term for this orchid nature. But then also what happens when you're on this developmental path of the orchid who's trying to bloom. You go through a phase called positive maladjustment, which is a very interesting concept because everyone who's maladjusted, probably, not everyone, but most think that they are positively maladjusted. So what does it really mean to be positively maladjusted, right? Mm-hmm. That quote, everyone loves that quote from was it Krishnamurti, I think, that it's not like it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So this positive maladjusted would be the really hot goth girl from high school that you just can't not have a crush on. Speaking personally,
I mean, I don't
know. Positively maladjusted, so attractive, but kind of something.
The image that she is, she's projecting the image that she is. I don't know what's inside her head, but quite possibly. Okay. But she could be very well adjusted.
Yeah. So what? So I see positive twice now. What is positive? What do you mean positive?
Well, remember that these things, these sensitivities, these contrarian natures, these being different and being maybe a little difficult, intense. You hear these people described as intense a lot. So yeah. And creativity, mental health, that's people know those things sometimes. Yeah. Right. So these disintegrative experiences are not always positive. People were writing them off back then and still now as, oh, you're just, put your big girl pants on and get over it.
Okay.
But that means just going along with what everyone else is saying. Like, can you keep questioning? Can you take a different path? Do you have to go along with everything? Dabrowski would have said that would be negatively adjusted.
Okay. If you end up falling in line.
Yes, exactly. Just put your head down, do what you're told, don't question, don't be weird, don't ask those annoying questions, and definitely don't be an artist. I mean, that may still be worthwhile advice, I say as an artist, but figure that out yourself through the hard work of actually challenging these things. So yeah, positive maladjustment. Dabrowski said, no, this is a good thing. This is developmental because it can lead somewhere good for this unusual person to be not the salt of the earth. We don't need everyone to be positively maladjusted. Well, this is now me speaking. This is not Dabrowski. He thought that this was positive. I would say maybe having too much of this would destabilize society, but we want to have some of them. Like, we definitely need the Brett Weinstein and Heather Hang doing what they're doing. We want that.
Okay.
Positive maladjustment. What is it? That's a very difficult question. Let's just put it out there to consider that it exists. and
Okay.
someone could be that.
Okay.
Then, okay, so what is positively maladjusted? It is, well, you figure it out by sorting out what your values are. What are your real values?
Okay.
That this
All right.
is this am I
Well,
making
okay.
a leap here?
No. I
Yeah?
just want a stepping stone. What do you mean by
Okay.
values? Like,
Yeah.
I like chocolate cake, or I won't eat chocolate cake except on Fridays because I like it so much. Like, what is a value?
Yeah. Ethics, I suppose we could say. Like, what is the right thing to do in a situation? Like, do we value, do we value being kind? Well, that's a perfect example that people will hear right now. Kindness versus, the weaponized kindness.
Truthfulness.
Yeah, truthfulness. So that's a question of values. Which is it? Do we always protect people's feelings, or do we sometimes say painful things, even though, because truth is a higher value than nice, even though nice is not bad. It's just you put it in a hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So that's the process that you need to do to figure out if you're positively maladjusted. Are you going along with, just the cheap version of the values, or are you actually following what you really thought through with your intense intellect and your emotions, what really should be your values?
Okay. So
Yeah.
initiating the process of introspection, but not in a totally disintegrating way quite yet. We'll get there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But ruminating on your life, what makes you, I guess you find your moral compass, which is kind of like this vague feeling, but you really think, well, what is the best? What is the good within human relationships or within my life? What is the good? And engaging with the question of the good will allow you to see, here's what I believe and here's what I'm supposed to believe.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so I like that you brought up Christianity. I had a friend who is, he's evangelical Christian, but very much, again, because he's this authentic, autonomous sort of person, he's doing it in a way that doesn't fit the caricature that a lot of people would have of evangelical Christians.
Yeah.
And there's this concept of, like, you sort out these values in positive disintegration, you aim for an ideal. And for Christians, the ideal is very obvious. It's Jesus Christ. It's presented to you right there. And so he wrote for Third Factor about the process of trying to live up to these values and sorting them out and seeing how they really played out in life. And I published that. And some people were just like, oh my gosh, how could you publish this? I didn't know this was a Christian magazine. And I thought that was really sad, because this is a perfect example for us to think about, whether you're religious or not, of someone trying to sort out values and live up to them, which is what the theory is about. You don't have to be religious, but it's a process of trying to do that. I think that if we're going to live in a society where you have so much freedom to decide your values, you need something like this. Like, this is one of the things I love about Dabrowski's work, is that it's giving us tools for the chaotic world that we live in, the total freedom. It says, all right, you are the sort of nonconformist type who is driven to be free. You will think for yourself. You will stand up in the face of, people telling you that you're bad and wrong and you're out of line. All right, well, you better do it well then. Okay. Otherwise, you're having a negative maladjustment and a negative disintegration.
I think I'm starting to understand positive maladjustment. It means you're maladjusted according to what's the word? According to the flock, but you own it. You own it, and it's based on a lot of work that you did, and it's based on, I guess, a sense of integrity or authenticity. That's kind of what's rooting you. So it's not that you are a contrarian anymore. You're not going against the grain just to go against the grain because people just expected you not to go against the grain. But you're like, well, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. The grain doesn't matter. I'm making my own sculpture out of wood here, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay. So the positive sense is that I'm me. I'm me, and so it starts from a place of not even warring with the norm anymore. You don't have to rebel anymore either, which would be another negative maladjustment. For the sake of rebelling.
For this, exactly. And that's where you aim for this trajectory that Dabrowski described. this process can be very painful. You can get canceled. Your friends can be mad at you. You know, you can just stir up a lot of trouble. But you're aiming for this reintegration where you're like, yes, I have the courage and confidence because I'm acting with integrity in line with values that I really thought through. We can't have our society isn't going to work if we dismiss religion and we don't bring in some other process like this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's essential, and it's you see why I said this was hard. It's hard to put it out there from the beginning. It's kind of like, wait, what are you talking about? You have to jump into why it matters. Mm-hmm. And I think that's it. And the real key question is, how do you start seeing, okay, the hierarchy of values. When do you see a higher and a lower path? And who sees it and why? And how can we make people recognize it and not just be deluded? Can you imagine how maybe this theory could be abused and taken by people who just want to be like, yeah, I'm positively maladjusted. I'm climbing this developmental pathway. I'm a virtuous, person.
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, you give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. You give him a fishing pole. He might just like wrap it around his wife's neck and garrote her.
Yes.
Garrote her.
Yeah,
so you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. But it gets into some of these, if you're really honest with yourself, and ideally this sort of intellectually, intense person is driven to be, then they start engaging in this process that Dabrowski in his jargony way called subject-object in oneself. Ooh. But I call that seeing yourself as others see you. It's you see yourself objectively, and you treat others, with for their subjective place. You try to understand how they see the world, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That makes sense, right?
Okay, subject object in oneself, you're saying, is basically perspicacity with regards to how people see you and how people see the world, and being able to see how people see you and see the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can develop it. You don't have to be born with that ability.
Okay.
You sort of, you cultivate it because, all right, so let's remember our intense, nerdy person. They might have some self-loathing from having been rejected and having been weird and having been, a little, intense. We'll just say intense.
Okay.
And so this process of seeing yourself as others see you can be really painful, especially if you've developed, you don't have social skills, or you have some traits that really are annoying people and you're aware of it, so you're a little emotionally activated. That's why you go online and try to find other people who have your same weirdnesses. And you are susceptible to then just building this realm where no one can question that we're great and we're virtuous, and you're in this self-protective little sphere of other weird people. But if you have this self-reflective ability and you can also see other people, you start thinking like, wait, am I really now acting in line with my values? This doesn't seem so good.
Okay.
See?
So it's part of one of the benefits of this introspective work towards values is that you can maybe stop yourself from being a full-blown cult member. You can get a little culty here and there, but you won't be completely swallowed alive by a dogma that might be more or less chained to your values or reality, if your values align with reality, which is another question.
Yeah. So we've been in abstract land for a long time. We should come with some stories, I think. I'm going to tell you.
Okay, good. Yeah, break out that censer of incense and do a little chant. Let's get rooted into the body.
So there was a reason I was telling Sasha Ayad about positive disintegration, because this is very relevant to kids with gender dysphoria, that new the ROGD cohort, I think. I can talk about that, but I also am going to say first that I used to be a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I haven't said that yet, right? This is new.
Well, I was going to make a joke about point of personal privilege, but I don't know if anybody watched that video from their 2019 Congress.
Yeah, I was at the 2017 Congress, and watching that gave me some, a little bit of a post-traumatic response.
So you were really in it. You were this is a very virtuous. The Democratic Socialists of America is basically a virtuous organization. Like their core values are very virtuous, at least on paper. Like they want to help the downtrodden. They want to lift up the people who are left behind. Like that is the thing.
Yeah, for sure. But you have to go into how some of these groups work internally. Like, do you go in there and feel like these are virtuous people? Well, all right, I'm going to start this. I'm going to go back a little bit. I joined DSA around like 2013, and that was before it transformed. There's something that I refer to as old DSA. DSA changed like the day that Trump was elected. People were joining in droves as state after state turned red on the electoral college map, right? So, and that was the young, let's say woke. I learned the word woke really soon after that, and it was used a lot within DSA. Whereas old DSA was these, 60s radicals, mostly very old. Okay, to demonstrate this, when I first joined as an early 30-something person, my friends in the group I'd say, I lost a tooth the day the Berlin Wall came down. I remember that my mom didn't care. She was watching the news, and I'm like, my tooth is more important than some stupid wall. So that's my memory. And they would say, oh, that's so cute. Wow, you were a little kid then. We were all like activists. Then when it changed rapidly, I would say I referred to the Berlin Wall coming down and losing a tooth, and they'd be like, you were alive when the Berlin existed? Like, you are so old. So that's how much it changed, right?
Okay.
This old guard they were just such cool people. Whether you are a socialist or not, I think the sort of people who watch your channel would just appreciate these people, on the basis of their character and their questioning nature. Because before Bernie Sanders ran, to call yourself even a democratic socialist was, you had to have a certain type of ability to withstand criticism and to answer very good questions about, like, why the heck are you calling yourself that? Have you ever heard of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? Did you ever know what happened there? And they could answer that. They could say, I hear you. Here's my vision. Let me describe it to you. Here's why I don't think that that's the way we have to go. And it was super inspiring. I was like, again, I come from Detroit. I had to leave Detroit because there weren't a lot of jobs there. Well, and because I went to work for CIA. I mean, that's why I left. But they were just some of the most interesting people to talk to, whether you agreed with them or not. They questioned. They had that questioning trait, and they were just fun.
I can see a lot of facial hair.
And because they had to be used to defending themselves, they were not going to cancel anyone else, right? They just had that temperament.
A lot of dialogue, a lot of argument. That was foundational, and actually it was adaptive because of the pressures that they were put under over the course of Reagan and beyond.
Yeah. Well, you had that, I forget his name now, but the author you talked to who also had the left activism. I loved that because, Steven. For sure. It was, he knew, that's what I'm talking about. They lived through all of that. And, new DSA changed. And that new, like, point of personal privilege, I started going, like, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah. Just a side note, so you were CIA analyst and a Democratic Socialist of America? Like, that's crazy. And you didn't get waterboarded?
Amazingly, I managed not to.
Oh, cool.
DSA is not a political party. The only concern there would be the Hatch Act. And so I got to talk to, my supervisor. I'm like, give me advice. Am I violating the Hatch Act? Like, go ahead.
Act?
Oh, sorry. I live in Washington, D.C., so this is common knowledge. The Hatch Act prevents people in certain government agencies from getting involved in partisan political activities. So Democratic Party, Republican Party, not, world-changing do-gooder organizations. You can do all of that you want.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Yeah. So
and the Hatch Act is religiously followed by everybody in government, I assume. Like, nobody ever violates that, ever.
Well, you can fight over how it's supposed to be applied to, Facebook. Is liking a tweet by a political candidate, is that violating the Hatch Act? And you start to have to care about those things, and it makes you want to pull your hair out. Yeah. But that's the Hatch Act.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah. And so I was, I told old DSA, I'm like, do you want me here? Like, I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. Is it okay? And they were like, oh, wow, hey, that's cool. Like, we even have analysts from CIA who like look at the world, and you even see the point of being a socialist. And I'm like, yeah, you're making interesting arguments. I'd like to talk to you more. Then it changed, and I didn't go around talking about. I have quit now. That's why I can talk about it.
Okay.
But I didn't go around telling people about my job, and they started, putting out things saying like, oh, CIA officers are not allowed to be DSA members. We're going to pass this with Robert's Rules of Order, and like, I was like, oh, I guess, you know what? I think I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this goes back to values, and
Yes.
it would be interesting to investigate the different values between old guard and new guard DSA. I made a blanket statement, and it was a little snarky, but I do think that in general, socialists are inspired by a certain set of values, which has to do basically, probably, most likely, with lifting up the people who are lower. That could be that. I think that is that kind of just like, we can get more detailed, but that's kind of just the sense I get as the primary value. And I see a lot of that in the argument. So old guard, you listed some of their values: intellectual engagement, argument, and then, taking in criticism and responding to it is another value. So I don't know what value, but like, I guess intellectual integrity and engagement is a value.
Yes, and humility, knowing that you may have something to learn from someone else. So I'd say that's related. They're old school activists, so they knew what they believed, but they respected other people. Yes, intellectual engagement.
And respect. Okay.
Yeah, respect.
Okay, so what did you see as the value set of this millennial DSA post-Bernie Sanders influx? What was the basic value set, and how did they riff from that? We're going to lift up the downtrodden into how we're going to run an organization.
Oh, that's a really good and kind of depressing question, because I don't think that they had, for the most part, with exceptions, I don't think they had true authentic values. Authenticity gets, it has its own like modern, it's like the new literally, which then became its opposite. Like authenticity has become its opposite in that same way. But when Dabrowski used it, he really meant like literal authenticity. And so I think a lot of what new DSA, woke millennial DSA became was a communal shared frustration over the state of having a lot of college debt and not having a job that you can move into, and being frustrated about that, and seeing like, okay, well, this is our economic system. Let's hate our economic system. I get why you'd be upset about that. Yeah.
Frustration and resentment. Okay.
Frustration and resentment, which are very human emotions, like we're all subject to them. But so you've actually made the perfect segue for me. If I may go abstract again, and we'll come back to some fun stories. But
good.
Dabrowski, the key is, again, seeing that higher and lower path. And once, like, how do you see there's a higher path? Well, I would say that a lot of people who are joining activist groups are in this, what Dabrowski would call a unilevel disintegration. There isn't really a higher path. There's just like, find a group, belong to that group, and then fight for that group. But you're just, again, you're in this group that is uniting over its frustrations and its anger and its resentment. And so you're sort of ambivalent, you're tossed around this way and that way. And the point is just to stay with the group, stay, directed by that group, so that you are belonging and things are, your intense negative feelings are addressed and have a place to be put. But you're not taking steps out of it. That's the difference. And Dabrowski would then call that, if you start taking steps out of it, which I think some of the old school DSA people did, that Dabrowski called multi-level disintegration. And that's what you want to get to. That's why you sort out the values.
Okay.
So, does that make sense?
We have spoken about positivity in this context of Dabrowski.
Yeah. Dombrowski, it's Polish, and there's various mispronunciations. Yeah, right.
There's various mispronunciations. Okay. What do you mean disintegration then? Like a universe? What is being disintegrated? One's clinging to an ego or to a cultural matrix? What is being disintegrated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and someone might tell me I'm wrong about this, but it is the manifestation of this your mental structure, how you make sense of the world, and how you stay stabilized, you know? So a disintegration is a mental health crisis of some sort. Or, I mean, you can have it not manifest in outward mental health crises the way we would think of that, but some sort of internal turmoil, intense internal turmoil.
Okay, which has to do either with one's, I guess, worldview being shattered, or somebody, you thought that maladjusted goth girl liked you, and it turns out that both she kind of likes everybody and she doesn't like you at all because she's kind of operating another plane, and then your heart's broken because you invested so much of your imagination into her. But anything where your assumptions are kind of questioned or destabilized is a disintegration. And so if I may posit that the process of disintegration is going through kind of a stage of like of loss, and then free fall, and then kind of trying to say, okay, well, how does the world make sense? Because a human being can't proceed forward without a sense-making kind of ideology, loosely said. So the process of building back up from it is the inverse of disintegration. It would be a reintegration or something like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Reintegration is the term. So putting it back together, your self-concept, building yourself in line with that person you want to be, and understanding how your view of how the world worked was, it fell apart. You have to improve it. You have to use that intellect to ask those questions to reintegrate it.
Okay. So within the context of new school DSA activism, you spoke about like kind of this influx of people who you noticed were motivated by frustration, maybe some resentment. Then they kind of just, we're gonna change the world, we're gonna make things better. And and then they imported just like Wall Street or Occupy Wall Street. They import this entire matrix of identity politic along with them, with the pronouns and the stacking and all this other stuff. And they're not in a place yet. They're not in a place yet to even question their own values, let alone the system that they've all kind of adopted, because it's the good. This is the representative of the good.
Well, and here's a perfect example. The actual thing that drove me out of the organization was a scandal, which was actually covered by the Austin Chronicle. It reached that level with a organizer from the Austin DSA chapter who had been a union organizer. Well, you know who has unions? Police have unions.
Okay.
Yeah, and he had worked with the police, and he got elected to the National Steering Committee for the whole organization at the 2017 conference. And then it came out after he was elected that, he had been a cop and he was bad and he covered this up. It's like, well, I won't rehash that. It doesn't matter. The point is there was a huge scandal and they drove him out, and he ended up leaving the organization. But he had a lot of organizational skills in building that chapter. He had union credentials, and from my perspective, the thing I tried to argue with people was, maybe if we want to reform the police, then maybe it would be good to have someone in the organization who has connections with the police and can give us data about how the police work. Like, this seems like a really useful asset to me. And old DSA agreed with that, and new DSA wanted to say, like, get ACAB, get the bastards out. All cops are bastards. Yeah. So this attitude of abolishing police or severing and this purity spirals going on, where you have to be authentic, and therefore you can't be a part of this structure that we're frustrated with, and we're going to tear down. Let alone, the real question is what would they put in the place, and did they ever get through to start putting that down in paper, or did they constantly just devolve into pronoun specifications? Right. And there were, I don't just want to say all the bad stuff about the organization. I did leave, but there were some people who did come back and try to push back and did manage to work really hard to climb up in the organization to say, like, a local Black leader who had said, well, actually, in these local Black communities, they have concerns about crime and they're not totally against police. And she had the standing to say that because she was a local Black leader, which is great. And I wish there would be more of those people having those discussions in what could have been and what could maybe one day still be a good organization. But for my needs, as the sort of thing I was trying to do, I just wanted to be on a campaign to organize for public banking, learn about public banking, and then decide whether it was worth organizing that or that kind of thing.
Okay.
Being the sort of activism.
Sorry, what?
The nerdy sort of activism.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like intellectual nerds who just want to learn about economic structures.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not as satisfying emotionally.
With the framework of positive disintegration in mind, and the I think my viewers and probably your viewers probably know enough about gender and the gender ideology and what's happening. We don't have to necessarily get into that, but we can just bring that up. And then the way that modern day activists or young activists now from 2016 onward are affecting what we call woke, kind of this matrix of values, but also there's some problematic things going on in there, and it makes one wonder if they're really being self-aware. If you look at these videos on TikTok of young people preaching pronouns and guilting each other and forcing each other to believe this thing, and the way that, Kathleen Stock, who I've had on my channel, she's a feminist in the UK, she's a philosopher. She wrote a book that I was going to try to get her on my channel, but now the union chapter head has declared all-out war on her, and she's being stalked and harassed by this trans group who thinks that, they talk about there's this genocide going on and their existence is being erased, and so they need to vilify this lesbian professor woman in order to maintain safety. But that kind of attitude, one wonders to what degree these individuals who are participating in this behavior are adjusted, maladaptive, and what circumstances will have to occur. Well, one, where the institutions don't provide them cover, but two, for somebody that's caught up in that, even just as an ally, so-called, to start to think through, to begin to think through the values. What is some sort, is it a crisis that needs to occur? What precipitates some sort of disintegration?
Yeah. Well, so at Third Factor, we've done some articles on this, which is how I'm getting into this topic. But so, the activists, again, much like I was describing with DSA, it's a lot of people uniting around, they're upset about something about who they are. They feel weird. I think that's the part that's been pretty well covered. I had a detransitioner write an article for our August-September issue. And it's Dysphoria and Disintegration in Women Who Are Too Much is the title. And she had discovered the original thing I wrote about this overexcitability, this intense intellect, this emotions, imagination, and how this fuels the orchid turmoil. And she shared that at Reddit, and I found her there saying, and I said, do you want to write for us? And she's like, yeah, I would love to tell my story. And so the result was where she came on and told the whole story of how she discovered this idea of positive disintegration. And she realized that described her struggle, that she had this idea that she had been given when she was in pain, when she was looking for a place to belong, a place where an intellectually gifted lesbian teenager in a home that was not very supportive of any of those things, could go online. That's what you do, especially if you're an intellectual type. You go online, you share your ideas, and you find a place where those ideas are mirrored back at you. That's great at first until, again, you put up the bounds of rules, the safe space. The safe space becomes a non-safe space when you start questioning it. There is not really a safe space to be a questioner. I mean, we're trying to build that online too, right? But who knows what will happen with that. then realized that this was not healthy. This was actually making her sense of dysphoria, general dysphoria, not just gender dysphoria, but unhappiness at being the sort of person who has been looked down upon and not given the path that she needs. She was more and more unhappy. She questioned, doing the incorrigible questioning that we talk about. She questioned all of these things she had been told, and finally just found a way to break out. And finding this idea that these creative girls, this is what you hear with the ROGD cohort. It is these intellectually gifted, creative types who are usually having this, because creativity, an interesting thing about creativity is that it's psychological androgyny is associated with creativity. You're looking at I don't think you like this since you're creative. You're a creative man. Yeah.
I think no. I'm totally integrated.
Oh, you're okay with that?
Feminine side.
Right.
It's just if you say that I have a feminine side, I don't mean that I'm half woman.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. Well, like that do you remember the headline where Billy D. Williams talked about being in touch with his feminine side, and some major publication said, "Oh, Billy D. Williams comes out as gender fluid." next day's headline is, "What the hell is gender fluid, Billy D. Williams?" So yeah, that's the idea, is being integrated with these two sides of yourself, the masculine and feminine that's in all of us. And that, for creative people, this is I'm going to drop more intellectual researcher names, but it's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is like an emeritus professor who does, I think, University of Chicago, who studies creativity. He literally wrote the book on creativity. That's the title of his book. This
on
popular
creativity?
book.
Or
yeah,
I wrote the book on creativity, a memoir.
Yes. His book is just called Creativity, a popular nonfiction book. It's pretty good. And it talks about some of this stuff. So for these girls who are not allowed to, or not, I won't say not allowed, but not encouraged to have these traits, especially lesbian girls, but even straight girls, who have these more assertive, science-minded things, they like sports, whatever that is that they like, that's more masculine, and they're discouraged for that. Now you hear kids, when we were younger, you could have that famous Lego ad with the little girl building the Legos that were just whatever, and what it is beautiful. But now Legos are made for girls in pink, and you have to like that, or you're asked if you're transgender. I've heard enough stories to say that's not an exaggeration. And so they disintegrate. They rebel against this mainstream belief that they're being presented in childhood, and they have a disintegration because they realize, and they have a unilevel disintegration where they join groups of other unhappy people, and then maybe they see the way out. The higher path, and how to take the difficult work of reintegrating toward that alternative. But it's lonely. You have to push back against now your new group of friends that had your back and mirrored your bad feelings.
Huh. Could you give me one moment? I need to close the door and get a bit of water.
Yeah, please.
Okay. One moment.
Okay. So.
Loneliness.
Yeah.
What's up with that shit?
It is a huge thing for our readers at Third Factor. They felt weird their whole life. That same thing, right? But you don't have to have felt weird as a kid to be lonely these days. We're all completely isolated, and we are connecting via platforms where everyone just puts out their rawest feeling without seeing how the other person is receiving it, right? Boomers are the worst on Facebook. They have no idea what they're doing, at least in my family. Yeah, but actually, I should take that back. There are plenty of people my age who also just communicate in memes, and we project our memes of what we believe, but there's no seeing how the other person responds to that and saying, "Oh, I care about you, your individual response, Benjamin Boyce, and I'm talking to you, and I notice you are looking quizzical versus reacting with joy to something I said." That's how people form real relationships, right? So this medium it's not conducive to that. I think that's really, we think we're making ourselves more connected and less lonely. But that when I was, again, I said I was a teenager on the internet, and I felt like, oh, I can go anywhere. I went to live in Japan, and my friend group was still accessible to me, which was, but if you depend on that too much, then the chance to connect with the new people around you and experience the fact that, you know, you're in Japan. You could go explore the world and have experiences with people. So again, it's those trade-offs. I can make this great platform online and have cool thoughts and do creative things, and that's good. I'm not saying it's not good, but it gets out of balance. Mm-hmm. And we move away. I can get this great job at the CIA, and it's really cool, but all of my family is back in Detroit. My niece and nephew are there, and my nephew just turned 1, and he had a birthday party, and I wasn't there. So there's so many things pulling us apart and making us lonely. But yeah, I think social media is definitely part of that.
Mm-hmm. It seems like facing one's loneliness is a necessary step in a process of corrective disintegration. The whole process of disintegration would be initiated by feeling unhappy, being frustrated, not fitting in, but kind of realizing that you're enmeshed in hypocrisy for any number of reasons. But the first step is there's a veil of loneliness, a cloud of unknowing. And I don't know to what degree people are really open to understand how to be lonely and what it means to be lonely and what happens when you get through the bad part of being lonely and then going through a process of not being slowed down by loneliness. But
yeah, I think almost like to have real connections takes some courage, because you have to show something real about yourself. The thing that could be rejected. When I moved to Washington, D.C., about 8 years ago now, I heard it takes 7 years when you move to a new place to like finally feel like you're rooted there. And that's been about right for me. If we count like 2020 as a lost year because of the pandemic, it took me 7 years plus the lost year. And I had my birthday party in August this year, just invited people over, and I realized, oh my gosh, I have all these friends now. Like, these are real friends. That there's a line I heard in college that I loved, and it's the idea that a friend is someone who knows you very well and likes you anyway. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's so true. You have to be willing to risk rejection to reveal yourself in order to have those real friends. And I have done that by talking about the detransitioners. I had people pile on me for that, people who I thought were my friends. It's amazing. You find out when you say something that is at all controversial, you see who actually is your friend, who's like, oh, I know you well enough and I trust you. I think you're wrong, but I'm curious why you think that, versus like, oh, you're a terrible person, Mm-hmm. And so that actually has been a blessing for me to have had. It was really painful to go through that. And I felt really lonely before that because I had this thing I wanted to talk about. Oh. And yet, I had lingering friends from DSA. Some of them finally canceled me or cut off ties over that. Whatever. But if I hadn't been willing to do something that was completely on my own, that I didn't think anyone was necessarily going to care, support me in, I had no idea how it was going to be received, and I had to wrestle with it on my own because I hadn't talked to anyone about it. I didn't know how they'd receive it. That was really lonely. And right afterward, people not understanding what it's like to be piled on, even people who are my friends, like that was really lonely. And realizing that all of my interactions, this was 2020, everything's through the screen right now, right? So that for me taught me a lot about loneliness, that you have to be willing to be by yourself, to do something autonomously, that it is on you, it is your decision, it is your responsibility, and not everyone's going to like you for it. Instead of when you're new, the reason I brought up being new to a place, when you're new, you're on your best behavior, you're putting out your dinner party self, and you're just trying to be polite. And that's good. Like most of our interactions probably should function that way, but not friendship, right? We have this expression in English, a close personal friend. But I had a colleague at my old job who spoke Russian, and he said in Russian, they just have the word drug, which is friend. But you don't talk about having a close personal drug. It just means friend on that deep level. And there's something about our culture where we use friend very cheaply. And maybe that's part of why we're so lonely. I don't know. But that's by risking being authentic and having integrity. Whether other people admire me or not, I have integrity. Hard earned. I still have growing to do. I'm not claiming some magical transformation or anything, but after that, I finally had friends. They don't all agree with me. Some of them argue with me, but I know they value me because of that. But it was really lonely getting there.
Yeah. Earlier, when you were talking about the DSA, the New Guard, you said something that made me. You were talking about authenticity, and you said that that's kind of become its opposite, and as it has been through the Instagramification of the personality. Like, what is your authentic self? It's produced to a T, and it's got all these identities, like adorning me. Well, that's not your authentic self. Can a 22-year-old be authentic? Do you not have to earn your authenticity? I mean, are the weird ones, to give a wink to Steve Jobs, the crazy ones, are they beset with a sort of kind of a early onset puberty, in a sense, of the personality? Like there's the puberty of the body, but like when you're 19, 20, 25, that's the puberty of the self kind of thing. That's where like you're going through and you're breaking all these things like intellectually and you're exploring and stuff, but you don't have an authentic self unless you're put in a position where you have to actually measure and think it through and trial and error and start to accept yourself and.
Oh man, I'm gonna tweet that out. The puberty of the personality. You finally have defined positive disintegration for me. But yeah, I think you're right. I think in some of the books, there's a one of the more accessible books that Dabrowski wrote that's actually in reprint. Talks a lot about adolescence. That where you do go through this disintegrative experience and you're trying on those values and they're unilevel and you don't know which one is higher or lower because you have to do the work of testing it.
Oh, okay.
Some of my favorite things, what really got me into Dabrowski's story, I realized I want to tell my own stories and not just do the jargon because it's the stories that bring it to life. And for me, it was the work of a guy, Dr. Michael Pikowski, who worked with Dabrowski, and he did profiles of people. He did Eleanor Roosevelt. He did a woman who survived the Holocaust, or actually she may have died in the Holocaust, who was in one of the concentration camps. He did Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General back in like the 50s. And these are like, maybe people don't know who that is, but I went and read his biography. It was really cool and interesting. I just love reading the stories of people who go through this and figure it out. Now, some of them, the reason I brought this up now is because some of these people were said to like have had it early on, right? They knew from the beginning, but I don't know if I buy that. I guess I do. I guess it's possible.
Have had
but
what? Early on.
They went through puberty really, really early. They didn't have to reintegrate. They just had this subject-object in oneself, self-reflection, this ability to see the higher path and understand how they related to others. But it's sure not common. I don't know anybody who fits that. I mean, if I get a pitch to Third Factor from someone who's just like, yes, I'm, at the highest level of reintegration, and let me explain to you, like, I get those. I definitely do get those. If anyone here is thinking of pitching me and they pitch me that, like I reject those out of hand because I just don't find it very plausible.
Okay.
But I love the stories. The stories I love are like, I started here. I had all these things, in the wrong order in my values. And then I went through a disintegrative experience, and now, I have grown. Yeah. So yeah, for sure.
For a certain percentage of my interviews, it's that story that I find most valuable. And I've even taken to, when I propose an interview to somebody, cold call them and say, especially a bigger name, it's like, I kind of want to see how you've changed. I want to see how you've grown. Like that's the story I want. And also when I'm recommended, you should interview this person, that person, and they turn out to be somebody that knows everything, I'm like, I don't like talking to people who know it all. I just, because there's always kind of, a tendency with guru-esque people to hide their vulnerability, and when they grew, because it seems like they've created a persona more than actually. And I'm not saying that every wise man out there, a wise woman out there, is that kind of guru, but I'm very wary of the guru. Plus, I don't want to turn my interview into just like, here's this person's ideas. I want to know their story and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's a real risk with Dabrowski's work. Like, he's kind of got a little bit of a cult following. Okay. They don't really like what I'm doing all that much, because again, I'm simplifying it, right? I won't be out there to stir the sort of discussion, because I almost feel like it is I want Third Factor to be tossing an inner tube to people who are floating in the sea, and like that young woman, the detransitioner, who then said, oh, maybe the answer is I'm an orchid, I'm super sensitive, and that leads me to grow in this unusual way. And then figure it out. What are you trying to do? Here are some things you can practice. You can try to sort out your values, but no one can tell you what those values should be. You have to do the work yourself, and you can completely delude yourself on it. I think we do all need role models, is what we need. And so we can look at them and say, yeah, that person, I admired this thing that they did, versus, they kind of messed up there, but I admire them. I see how they came through it, and I can learn from that. So versus, I see it as, I hope, an antidote to this sort of identity building that we're all doing, young people especially are doing.
So this might be where, meow.
Hi, kitty.
There might be, mine's came in the room over there. The pitfall or the cult-like following, I'm just spitballing here, so please correct me, of Dabrowski, it might be because he has some sort of answer. There's an answer-ish kind of end to the arc. There's a pot of gold over that rainbow, right? And whenever there's that, people kind of they figure out, well, how do I emulate that instead of emulate like the human arc? I can just be the ideal me. But you still need to have that telos. You still need to have that goal. So with the grain of salt perfectly affixed into the ear of the audience, what is this reintegration? What is it to realize that?
Oh. See, I don't feel that I have the capacity to give that answer, because I don't like guruing. But I'll give you my best shot. I will give you a shot at it. When you are actually living in line with what you believe to be truly good values that you have tested through that long process, through that, the puberty of the character that you described, you've done it the hard way. You've recognized all of the things you dislike about yourself, because these are people who do dislike a lot of things about themselves, and they are orchids who really want to bloom. And some of these people, they start identifying with pathologies. It's super popular now for young people to put mental health diagnoses that often self-given into their their Twitter bios or wherever they are. And I think the telos here is to remember that you have some control. The is it the internal locus of control. You have this ability to reflect and to choose your values and to sort out and ask questions about why you're being received the way you are and what you could do to change that and what you value about yourself that is then different. You see what's good and what's bad about your character, regardless of what other people say about you, regardless of whether it's, yes, you are fitting into the group, or yes, we value your questions. It's about developing that confidence. It's a hard process. That's why it's not easy to say, like, okay, what's the end point? But I think it is it's the hero's journey is what I think it is.
Okay.
It's it's a psychological theory that is the hero's journey put into the steps that are going on inside the person's mind. And it gives you some comfort that you can get over those pathologies that you've been identifying with, or those struggles that you've been having, that you've been uniting with other people over, and that it's on you. The responsibility is on you to do the work, to do that hierarchization, to really understand what it means to be authentic. And then to aim for that ideal that you have thought through. And it's up to you. It's on you. There is no answer. It's on you to have that responsibility as a human being with agency to decide where you need to end up, but not to delude yourself along the way.
Makes me think of this word or this concept, again, like Christianity, kind of not popular too much anymore. So I don't know how many people recognize this, but it's called the adult.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly. But not all adults get to this stage.
Well, no.
Yeah. So, most of us probably don't totally get there, but it's an ongoing process of that self-reflection. Well, I was going to say that, one of the things, and these are people with real struggles, because some of this emotional intensity, they're not always people with huge struggles, but some of them are. They'll come in with things saying like, this started to scare me a little bit. When the emotional intense element of it, people would come in and be like, oh yeah, I have borderline personality disorder, or these like really extreme diagnoses. And I'm like, are you giving that to yourself? Did someone tell you have that? And if so, why? And have you looked at like your behaviors? Because they're so anxious and so desperate for someone to tell them that they are okay. And I realize they're coming to my website because they want to be told that they're okay. But I cannot tell them that. I do not know them. What I can say is, here are some examples of people who have been where you are, who have had these intense emotions, who have had, dysregulation, who have been rejected for being nerds, who question too much, who live in fantasy worlds. And here's how they got out. So don't give up on yourself. Okay. But you have to make that choice. You have to still care about, I don't care about your internal world so much. Whether, that's not for me to judge. What I can judge is your behavior and how you're engaging with the world, whether your ideas seem to be pointing towards something true and good, and whether you're treating other people well or not. Yeah. Or if you're just asking us to dance around you all the time on the eggshells. Yeah. Yeah.
So what kind of work are you seeking to produce at Third Factor magazine? Like, do you want people in all stages of disintegration? Just like a big party of crises and personality implosions, and then great rubble-esque ruins of their creative endeavors? Yeah.
Yes, we are looking to put out. We didn't start with, but stories of people who had gone through the gender disintegration, but other things too that are more lighthearted. Remember, we have the creative element to our audience. People who, I am now self-employed. I left CIA because I really had this creative impulse that I wanted to pursue. And so I have clients who I don't put out there so that no one can reach out to my clients and tell them I'm bad, and but I do have them. And so I have, articles by people who are pursuing alternate life paths, like self-employment, and what they went through to get there. But above all, I like these stories of people sorting out their values. We try to be fairly neutral in terms of, like, you want to say why you were with Trump and you're not with Trump anymore. You want to say why you were a Democrat, you're not a Democrat anymore. Like, I don't care. I want to hear the story of that transformation and how you sorted out those values, so we can have that conversation. Because how can you sort out your values really without getting some feedback from other people, I think. And so I see us as offering that. The one value that I finally did set down as, this is something I'm going to stick with, because I have to stand for something, or I can't I'm not just going to accept every single thing that comes my way. I joined a small group called, a fledgling coalition called the Institute for Liberal Values. Okay. And I think that you've interviewed some of our other members before. Free Black Thought, Counterweight, they're parts of this organization. And we stand for that thing that's now being called classical liberalism. And I know, like, I have some left views, but I ultimately, again, I like old DSA, and they're questioning and they're engaging in argument. So that for me was, as a magazine, we try to practice hierarchization of values. And our top value is, let's engage about these things. Let's engage in discourse. Let's hear out why you think what you think. And that, for me, maybe someone else will differ. Again, I'll argue with, I'll discuss with them, but I think that belongs really high on a hierarchy of values of a mature person. And so, yeah, I'm connecting with other people who are doing that. So we will, I hope to get, content that tells the story, tells stories of other people sorting out values in that way. I will publish things I disagree with, as long as they stick to that, freedom of engagement for everyone sort of aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. And what is the third factor?
We never defined that, did we? All right. One last thing then of the jargon from the theory. According to Dabrowski, there are 3 factors of development. The first one is nature. The second one is nurture. And the third one is this process of authentic choice, authentic conscience leading your agency. Okay. That's the third factor.
Okay, cool. So you're born, you're given this squishy body, and then this mind that's kind of just set up to do what this individual thing is going to do. And then you have the molding process of childhood and development, and that's ensconced within people teaching you what to do, or giving you the ability to develop your faculties. And then you embark on becoming an adult and owning and regulating and deciding what works and what doesn't work about your nurture and your nature, combining them into something that hopefully is productive and awesome in some way. Basically
you've got it.
All right.
Yeah.
I have a question, but I might have to cut it out because it might be an impossible question to ask you.
Okay, go for it.
How worried should we be about the government going after us for our political views and controlling what we're allowed to say and criticize about the government?
Oh man, yeah. So CIA covers foreign nationals. You should be asking someone from the FBI, maybe. But what I can say is I personally am more worried about companies like Google than I am about our government. Okay. That I can say. Yeah.
Okay. Good thing that our government and Google aren't like lobbying one another or in bed with each other. They're completely distinct.
Yeah. Yeah, no comment. Sorry.
Whole other conversation. And I'd like to have you back on. I guess we're wrapping up now. But I would like to have you back on to talk about data analysis, not necessarily so much strictly your time in the CIA, but I'm just curious about, because I think it would be a good skill for people to develop when we talk about media literacy. Like, how do you analyze data? How do you engage with this massive influx of stimuli that's going through your news feed?
I love that topic. I that's right up my alley, but I've never thought, to put myself out there to talk about it. So I'll tell you what, if you send me some questions that you really want to get at how a CIA analyst does things, I will answer them, but you have to give them to me early enough that I can send them to CIA and make sure I won't go to jail if I answer them on your channel.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Well, press and stuff. Yeah, I totally do that.
You're like that guy whose fists are legal weapons, because if you deploy them in the wrong way, you're going to kill somebody. But like it's your what is it?
Oh, yeah.
Divergent mind.
Well, that's not very CIA, remember? They're trying to teach their people to be more like me. Not too much like me. Not too much like me. So, yeah. That's important stuff, and I'd love to talk about it.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Jessie, for joining me. I was joking to my camera before we started the call, like trying to explain what you do, and you did that for me. But I'll still go back and do a proper introduction. But pretty juicy ideas you got going on there.
I know I'm working it out, so I'm always open to criticism and questions. So thank you for helping me work out, how do people even receive this stuff? Mm-hmm. Really enjoyed it, Benjamin. Thanks for having me on.
So Third Factor Magazine, is that mostly print? Do you guys do a podcast as well? Do you guys have interview stuff as well? Or is it mostly print at this time?
It is not print. It is only online, thirdfactor.org.
Okay, I'm sorry, text.
Yeah, it's text-based. We are in the early phases of trying out a podcast, experimental. With me and a couple co-hosts, Vincent DeBoni, who you've interviewed before, and also Laura, who is a detransitioner who talks about her detransition, and we weave that together with positive disintegration. We're trying to model the kind of intellectually intense questioning that we are seeking in the world. So, it's
so look forward
Check
for that. It's out there?
It's out there, yeah.
Okay.
Spotify, Google, Apple, YouTube. Look for us, Third Factor.
We'll link it in the description.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.